Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri ki jai. Ganga Mai Jamuna Mai ki jai. Tulsi Maharani Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 2, Chapter Struggling Alone. Srila Prabhupada had just described the blackout of 1965 in a letter to Sally, because she inquired, she was very concerned. And then, after Prabhupada had written 3 letters to Sally, 2 letters to Mati Murarji that went unanswered, he finally got a reply from his godbrother, Srila Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. So, Satsrup Maharaj, he gives a paraphrase with a little explanation in between each section of the letter, Prabhupada's reply to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. We will go through the whole letter, but first we'll read what Satsrup Maharaj has to say about Prabhupada's response. Srila Prabhupada received a reply to his letter of November 8th to Tirtha Maharaj in Calcutta. Prabhupada had explained his hopes and plans for staying in America, but he had stressed that his godbrothers would have to give him their vote of confidence as well as some tangible support. His godbrothers had not been working cooperatively. Each leader was interested more in maintaining his own building than in working with the others to spread the teachings of Lord Chaitanya around the world. So how would it be possible for them to share Srila Prabhupada's vision of establishing a branch in New York City? They would see it as his separate attempt. Yet despite the unlikely odds, he appealed to their missionary spirit and reminded them of the desires of their spiritual master Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Their Guru Maharaj wanted Krishna consciousness to be spread in the West. But when Prabhupada finally got Tirtha Maharaj's reply, he found it unfavorable. His godbrother did not argue against his attempting something in New York, but he politely said that the Gaudiya Math funds could not be used for such a proposal. So now we'll read the letter that Prabhupada wrote. Prabhupada wrote this letter on the 23rd of November, 1965. So you'll notice that Prabhupada's visa was going to run out on the 17th of November. So Prabhupada decided to stay on. He extended until April for $10. May it please your holiness, I am in due receipt of your letter of the 17th instant, and although it is not very encouraging, still, as I am not a man to be disappointed, I take courage from your letter, as you write to say that there is possibility to raise the fund, but it will take some time. Expecting your reply in the above spirit, I had some correspondence with the broker firm, and the latest reply which I have received from them is joined herewith, please find. We'll see that letter from the broker later. So I have seen the property, and the whole space is twice as much as your Research Institute building on the road, which is just in the central part of the city of New York City, with all good facilities. Now, if you decide to purchase the property, I can assure you that the building is just suitable for our purpose, and it is almost on the same style as your Research Institute. So, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, after all of the legal battles, after many years, about more than half of the Chaitanya Maths came under the hands of Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, and he made his headquarters at the Mayapur Yog Pit, the Chaitanya Mat. Aside from that, in Calcutta, they had the Sri Chaitanya Research Institute at 70B Rash Bihari Avenue, Calcutta. So this was an extended branch of the Chaitanya Mat in Mayapur. And other than this, they also had the Bagh Bazar, big temple. So Satsru Maharaj, he gives a little summary of this. Prabhupada replied, "It is not very encouraging still. I'm not a man to be disappointed." In fact, he found a little hope in Tirtha Maharaj's reply. So he described to his godbrother the property he had recently found for sale at 143 West 72nd Street. The building, only 18.5 feet wide and 100 feet deep, consisted of the first floor store, a basement, and a mezzanine. Prabhupada presented Tirtha Maharaj the price, $100,000 with a $20,000 cash down payment, and remarked that this building was twice the size of their research institute in Calcutta. Prabhupada conceived of the basement as a kitchen and dining area. And strangely enough, our temple, that our finally big temples, we had one first in Manhattan, and then later that was sold, unfortunately, and we settled on Skirmorhorn Street in Brooklyn. That also has the kitchen and the dining, or the prasadam hall, and the restaurants. The restaurant they're both in the basement. So when the people come in, they go downstairs for that. The first floor is the lecture hall, and the mezzanine as personal apartments with a separate area for the deity of Lord Krishna. Appropriately, Prabhupada had described himself as a man not to be disappointed. He was convinced that if there were a center where people could come hear from a pure devotee, the genuine God-conscious culture of India could begin in America. Yet because he had made his plans dependent on obtaining an expensive building in Manhattan, his goal seemed unreachable. Still, he was persistently writing to prominent devotees in India, though they were not interested in his plans. Krishna had a different plan, and we'll see what that is, how it unfolds. Why should they not help, he thought. After all, they were devotees of Krishna. Shouldn't the devotees come forward to establish the first Krishna temple in America? Certainly he was qualified and authorized to spread the message of Krishna. As for the place, New York was perhaps the most cosmopolitan city in the world. He had found a building, not very expensive, a good location, and there was a great need for a Krishna temple here to offset the propaganda of the Indian Mayavadis. The Krishna Bhaktas to whom he was writing understood Lord Krishna to be not simply a Hindu deity, but the Supreme Lord, worshipable for the whole world. So they should be pleased to see Krishna worshipped in New York. Krishna himself said in the Bhagavad Gita, "Give up all other duties and surrender to me." So if they were Krishna's devotees, why would they not help? What kind of devotee was it who did not want to glorify the Lord? But Srila Prabhupada did not judge beforehand who would serve Krishna's mission and who would not. He was fully surrendered and fully dependent on Krishna, and in obedience to his spiritual master, he would approach everyone without discrimination to ask for help. So this is the continuation of Prabhupada's letter. Now the second letter, describing almost the same things in this second letter. The basement can be used as cooking and dining department, the store as the lecture hall, and mezzanine for installing the Sri Vigraha and personal apartment. The building is quite suitable, and once started, it will be possible to raise fund by lectures and membership fees, etc. Now, Prabhupada was doing that because he learned from his spiritual master how to set up a thriving society that spread all over. So Prabhupada also had membership fees for his League of Devotees, 2 rupees a year, because the fortnightlies that Prabhupada was sending out, the Bhagavad Darshans and the Back to Godheads, they only cost 10 paisa. Originally they cost 6 paisa. So, and I think this amount you can arrange immediately and just start a branch of your Sri Chaitanya Mat, or designate the branch as New York Gaudiya Mat. The idea is very nice to think of, and it will be a nice reply to the local Ramakrishna mission, who indirectly denied to allow me lecturing in their hall. You will be glad to know that my lecturing propaganda is going on, and so long as I remain here, it will go on without any hamper. So, just for a little historical understanding of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's attempts to establish Chaitanya Mats outside of India, the first European preaching center was established in London in 1933. Bhakti Saranga Goswami went there. The address was London Gloucester House, Cornwall Garden, W7 South Kensington, under the name Gaudiya Mission Society of London. Lord Zetland, the English Secretary of State, was the president of this society, and it was Lord Zetland who asked, could he become a Brahmin? And the reply was, you just have to follow the 4 regulative principles, and he said, impossible. But still he was willing to become the president of the society. The second European preaching center was opened by Swami B.H. Ban Maharaj in Berlin, W30, Eisenacher Street, 29. So Ban Maharaj came back just before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left this world. There was no real demarcation in Berlin. He brought 2 fledgling devotees who later took Harinam from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he didn't go back. Instead, on his own desire, he began the Oriental Institute of Oriental Philosophy right across the street from here. But there was a hitch to that. You'll see all the signs now. Ban Maharaj College of Engineering, Ban Maharaj Law College, Ban Maharaj this and that and the other thing. That's because in order to get the land that he got, and it was a very big parcel of land, he had to come under the grips of the Agra University, Dr. Ambedkar something. And therefore he had to follow what they wanted him to do. So although his intention was very lofty, and Prabhupada also took part in the Oriental Institute, the Oriental Institute of Philosophy. There were classes in Sanskrit and different degrees given. But eventually, after Ban Maharaj left this world, the university took over the entire establishment and turned it into what it is to this day. He was quite reluctant. Prabhupada, when we got this parcel of land, because miraculously it was right across the street from Ban Maharaj, Prabhupada asked him, because Prabhupada had so many devotees at that time, hundreds and thousands, that why don't you allow us to use your land? He wouldn't allow it. Very, 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 for a short time in the 1974 festival, because we had no accommodations except for Fogal Ashram, he allowed the devotees to stay in some of the buildings. Other than that, there was no cooperation whatsoever, although he did from time to time express his appreciation for all that Prabhupada had done. There was Sumati Murarji. She had helped him in publishing the Bhagavatam, and she had sent him to America. In a recent letter to her, he had only given hints. So we've read these letters, so I'm not going to read them again. But he had received no reply. He had not heard from her since Butler, though her words to him had seemed prophetic, and they had stuck with him. What Sumati Murarji wrote is, I feel that you should stay there until you fully recover from your illness and return only after you have completed your mission. Now Sumati Morarji must do something big. He told her point blank, and that is when he encouraged her to open the first Bal Krishna temple in America. He assured her that he had no ambition to become the proprietor of a house or temple in America, but for preaching, a building would be absolutely required. He informed her that he had located a building just suitable for this great missionary work. It was ideal, as if it was built for this purpose only. So, next comes a wonderful thing that happened, because as Prabhupada, whenever he had spare time, he would take the bus to this place or that place, and just across the street of Central Park begins at 59th Street. It goes from 1st Street, 2nd Street, all the way up to way 100 something, I don't know. But at 59th Street begins Central Park. And on the east side is Fifth Avenue, the famous Fifth Avenue, which is considered the most important street in New York City. And at 64th Street, 364th Street, is the Indian consulate. The Indian embassy is in Washington, and the second officer is called the consul. So where the consul is called the consulate. So they had a very nice place there. And Prabhupada contacted the officials there. And they were very encouraging to Srila Prabhupada. So much so that every year they had several social events, both American and Indian. And every year they celebrated the birth anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore, because he was an international figure. He was the first non-Caucasian, non-white person who got the Nobel Laureate Peace Prize. So they were very proud of him, and therefore they had this program every year on his birthday. And they invited Srila Prabhupada to speak on that at the consulate building itself. Recently, one lecture of mine is arranged in our Indian government house. The name of the building was the New India House, organized by the Tagore Society of New York, who organized such meeting only for the most distinguished persons. The consul and other officers of the New India House are impressed with my book, and practically the second officer, consul, is arranging the meeting, inviting all distinguished gentlemen, both Indian and American, with tea party. So this is the last entry in Prabhupada's 1965 diary. On the 28th of November, meeting at New India House, God Consciousness, under the auspices of the Tagore Society of New York. Now, in the book, this was the invitation that was sent out. We'll read it later. I'm just showing here because previous to the computer age, anyone who needed to go to India from the East American states, 10 states, had to go personally to the Consulate General of India in New York. So we would all go there. Whenever any of the devotees were going to go to India, they would always come to New York City, and they would apply for their visa, and then they would collect for their ticket there as well in New York. So we would go there so often, and then just on the other side of the street, while we were waiting for our visa to be issued, we would wander through Central Park during the daytime, the zoo, and all different interesting places to see in Central Park. And then in the afternoon, pick up our visas to go on to India. Now, this is the India House. The consulate building was bought by the government of India and came to be known as New India House. It was very impressive. The building houses the Consulate General of India since then. The Consulate General of India, New York, serves the residents of 10 states, and the welcome cooperation has been extended by the Association for Asian Studies, South Asia Committee, the Asia Society, and the Embassy of India and its various agencies to the Tagore Society of New York. So we heard of some of these committees before when Prabhupada visited the University of Pennsylvania, and Dr. Brown. He was the founder of some of these societies. So all of these people, these very highly placed and influential intellectuals and now government officers, they were very supportive of Srila Prabhupada in America. So as he was losing support in India, he was gaining support in America from very influential people, and this was proof of it. The Tagore Society of New York is a nonprofit cultural organization founded in 1958, promoting the ideals of Tagore's universalism in USA. Rabindranath Tagore was announced as the first non-European literature laureate on November 13th in 1913. Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize because of his profoundly sensitive, fresh, and beautiful verse, by which, with consummate skill, he has made his poetic thought expressed in his own English words a part of the literature of the West. So there was no real religious message that the Americans received from Rabindranath Tagore other than the universality of the Supreme in some form. It's not like the Ramakrishna Mission, not like the Shivananda Society. This was literature that was being appreciated all over the world. And Prabhupada, being very well educated in English and having a universal message for all, therefore the consulate invited Prabhupada to represent actually the Indian community at this esteemed program. So this was the invitation that was sent out, and this is the letter that Prabhupada, he included this in the letter to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. The copy of the invitation letter is also subjoined herewith. The Tagore Society of New York Incorporated cordially invites you to a lecture, God Consciousness. So because Prabhupada was speaking to a universal group, he did not use the word Krishna in this sense. By A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Date, Sunday, November 28, 1965. Time, the lecture was 3:30. Tea was 4:30. Place, the New India House, 3 East 64th Street. And their introduction about Srila Prabhupada was, a widely respected scholar and religious leader in India. Swami Bhaktivedanta is briefly visiting New York. He has been engaged in the monumental endeavor of translating the 60-volume Srimad Bhagavatam from Sanskrit into English, etc. So this was a very well-received program. Prabhupada goes on in his letter. So my lecturing or appointing one selling agent here for my books is already finished. And if I remain, such many lectures can be arranged in different parts of the country. One Dr. Chaudhary is prepared to arrange for my lectures in San Francisco, Los Angeles, etc. So you can remember that Prabhupada wrote to Sally that he was planning to go to California, although it was 3,000 miles away, but he didn't have money, so he asked Sally to send him $40 to help him go to California. But in my opinion, such casual lectures may be a good personal advertisement, but factually they do not make any permanent effects. But if there is a center of activity for attracting people, as you are doing in the Research Institute, the people can be trained up in the cult by regular association and hearing the transcendental sound of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we can see through Prabhupada's progression in America, although he was getting preaching engagements here and there, first in Butler, Dr. Mishra's ashram, his yoga studio, now at the Indian consulate, there was no real fixed following of Srila Prabhupada yet. And it wasn't until Prabhupada went from Dr. Mishra's studio to the Bowery, which was also just a temporary place. Finally, when he got his own place at 26 Second Avenue, within a month, he was beginning initiations and accepting disciples. So exactly what Prabhupada presupposed was exactly what happened. Here we have a picture of the first initiations going on at 26 Second Avenue. He couldn't do these things until he had his own place. Now we have got our English Srimad Bhagavatam, and there will be no difficulty to impress the audience with our Siddhantas. And any intelligent man impressed with our Siddhantas will certainly change his life's mode of action. I think you may take up this suggestion very seriously and immediately start the center, and other things will automatically follow. This was on deaf ears, actually. Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj had no intention of helping Srila Prabhupada in America. He was interested in clinging on and trying to maintain the centers that were dwindling now in India. He didn't have the funds, actually, to extend to Srila Prabhupada, nor was he particularly enthusiastic or encouraging to Srila Prabhupada. And above all this is to satisfy the transcendental desire of Srila Prabhupada, meaning Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who desired very enthusiastically to start centers like that in the foreign countries. If you want to start the center on rented house, the rent will not be less than $300 to $400, but the space will be 1/4 of the house as we want to purchase. So here we have the last grand meeting when Hridai Ban Maharaj returned from Germany with his 2 students, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is sitting in the center, and over on the far side you'll see Abhay Charande. He's sitting there right along with the dignitaries. And this was, it should have been a grand occasion, but actually it was a disappointment. First of all, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he had to financially support the 2 centers in England and Germany. And very little was accomplished from those 2 centers. So when Ban Maharaj came back, there were no plans for him to go back and try further. Thus, he started the IOP. And then Prabhupada, he gave the option. Of course, Prabhupada, in the very beginning, we didn't have our own places around the world. We used to do as Prabhupada did in the beginning. We would rent a little storefront, and we would put up some nice pictures that we got from Brijbasi and Sons, wherever we could find them. And we had paintings that the devotees are starting to paint. We would decorate the temple with those, make an altar. It was like a prototype. 26 Second Avenue was the prototype for how to make temples all over the world. And it wasn't actually until we purchased the temple at Los Angeles, Prabhupada had his first world headquarters, and the first temple that was built was this temple. That's why this is Prabhupada's home. Although he had rooms in all of the centers that he visited, this is the only place where Prabhupada was built a home for him to live in. So this is the letter that the broker wrote to Prabhupada. Dear Sir, in answer to your letter of November 16th regarding the property for sale on West 72nd Street, this is located at 143 West 72nd Street. It is 18.6 by 100.2 feet, contains a store and basement, both the same size, and a mezzanine. The owner is asking $100,000 for the property with $20,000 cash, and will make good terms on a first mortgage that they will take back. It's going to be a 25-year mortgage. As I have the keys, you can call me for an appointment to see the property. Yours very sincerely, Louis Bone. So Prabhupada, he concludes his letter. If you agree, kindly confirm it by wire. That means send me a telegram. so that I can ask the broker to stay the house for some time for sale to other party. The Christian churches are not very favorable in the matter of increasing the Hindu religious institutions, as it is natural to think with sectarian views. I hope you will accept this proposal and confirm it by wire on receipt this letter by the end of this month. Hope you are all well, and with humble obeisances for all the Vaishnavas. I am yours obediently. There was no reply after this. All right, so we just read the invitation that was sent out, and now we have a very interesting first-hand experience of someone who was in the audience who came to this program at the New India House. November 28th. Daud Harun had never met Srila Prabhupada. He was a musician living downtown, and he used to attend the meetings of the Tagore Society up on 64th Street. Daud Harun says, I went uptown and walked into the auditorium, and I noticed that the stage was empty and a few people were sitting toward the rear of the auditorium. I walked forward down the center aisle because I usually like to sit up front. Then I saw an old gentleman sitting over to the right, and he sort of drew me over to him. So I went over and sat beside him, and then I noticed that he was saying his beads, chanting japa. Even though he had his beads in a bag, I could hear them, and I could see his body moving. And I felt very comfortable, because this was something I was used to. He was from India. As I was sitting there looking around the auditorium, he just turned around and smiled at me very nicely. He nodded his head and I nodded my head. And he smiled and turned around. Then he turned back to me again and softly asked me if I was from India. Oh. I said, no, sir. I'm not from India. I am from here, the United States. He turned back, and he kept chanting with his beads. Then he turned around the next time and asked if I was a Hindu. I said, no, sir, I'm not a Hindu. I'm a Muslim. And he said, oh, very good, very good. Yes, many times I hear the children in India reciting the Quran. And then he turned back around, and his body was moving, rocking, and he was working with his beads. Then there were a few more exchanges of pleasantries, sort of intermittent. And then a lady came up on the stage and announced that the lecture was to begin, and if the folk could give the speaker, a round of applause, they would welcome him to the stage. At that point, the man I was sitting next to, put his hand on my shoulder and said, excuse me, sir, could you do me a favor? And I said, yes, anything. He said, would you watch over my books? I looked down on the floor, and he had several boxes of books and an umbrella and several other articles. I said, yes, I would watch over these. And he said, excuse me. He walked up the aisle, and surprisingly, he walked up on the stage. And it was the man I had come to hear, Swami Bhaktivedanta. He walked up on the stage and introduced himself to the people and tried to get them to come forward. He said, come forward, come forward. A few of them came up to the front. There were mixed couples, many Indians, male and female, mostly middle-aged and some college-aged. A lot of professor types and ladies were there. Then he began his speech. He dove right into it. He just started exclaiming, proclaiming the greatness of the Creator, and that the most important thing is to remember the Creator and remember God. He began to expand on God consciousness, what God consciousness is, and how God is everywhere, and how it behooves us to all remember God, no matter what we call Him, what names we call Him by, but that we should call Him. He gave a demonstration which was very moving. He chanted Hare Krishna Hare Ram, and spoke about the power and saving grace in the mantra. He took a little break about halfway through and had some water. The last thing he said as he was coming down from the podium was that he had copies of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Oops. Okay. He explained that he had been working on them and that they came in 3 volumes and were $16. Then he concluded and came down. A lot of people went over to him. Some were timid, some were very enthusiastic. Some people shook his hand and were asking for books. At first, there were about 15 people gathered around him, talking to him and asking questions. With so many people around, he came over to me and said, "Sir, would you do me one more favor? Will you kindly take over the selling of the books? People will be coming to you for the books. So you sell the books and put the money in this little box, and I will be with you in a minute." I said, "Fine." So while he talked to the people, others came up to me. They must have thought I was somehow his secretary or his traveling companion. And people were coming over to me and asking me personal questions about him, which I couldn't really answer because I didn't know. Some people were buying the books or looking through them. So this went on, and I was trying to listen to him carry on his conversations with people and carry on the book selling at the same time. Some of the people were looking for a guru and trying to find out what he was supposed to be. Some of them were really interrogating him, but he just smiled and answered all their questions simply. I remember he told them, "You will know, there is no pressure. You will know if I am your guru." He suggested that people go over and read the books. And then the group dwindled down to about half a dozen, and the few remaining were just looking at him, and some were too timid to approach him. He walked over to them and spoke to them, putting them at ease. Later he came over and we counted the collection, and I helped him pack up his box and carry downstairs the boxes of books that were left. As we parted, he thanked me very much, and I gave him my name and address and phone number and purchased a set of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he also took a set. So now we've completed chapter 3. We're going on to chapter 4. You can see the impressive title. It will not be possible to assist you. So it starts with a quotation Prabhupada wrote that we heard 2 weeks ago, a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Sumati Morarji. Prabhupada wrote, "I have come here in this old age, neither for sightseeing nor for any personal interest. It is for the interest of the entire humanity that I am trying to implement the science of Krishna, which will actually make them happy. So it is the duty of every devotee of Lord Krishna to help me by all means." So that was November 28th, the program. And Satsru Maharaj begins. November passed and December came, and Prabhupada, having obtained an extension on his visa, stayed on. America seemed so opulent, yet many things were difficult to tolerate. The sirens and bells from fire engines and police cars seemed like they would crack his heart. In New York City, there's no peace whatsoever. Day and night, especially at night. Now also here in Vrindavan, they've got the sirens going. Nobody knows what they're doing. I think it's just to keep the police awake in the car. But they learned that from America probably, because all night long things are going on, sirens, and you just can't get any proper sleep. Sometimes at night he would hear a person being attacked and crying for help. I remember when we had to live in New York City, 3 times I had to call the police because I would hear people from my window, "Help, help, help." And what else can you do? You can't go out and help the person, of course, so you call the police. And then within 10, 20 minutes, the police will come. By that time, the person's dead or whatever. But it goes on all the time in New York City. It's just a part, and such a frightening place to live sometimes. From his first days in the city, he had noted that the smell of dog stool was everywhere. Now, since that time, this was the 60s, there was such a terrible smell of dog stool in the city that they made a rule now that if you have a dog and you take him for a walk, you have to carry a scoop and a plastic bag. And wherever the dog passes stool, you have to clean it up, otherwise you get a penalty. So this is what's happened to the Americans now. They're cleaning up their own dog's stool, otherwise they get fined by the government, because it was just unbearable. And although it was such a rich city, he could rarely find a mango to purchase. I had never seen a mango in my whole life until I came to India. And lotuses, according to Americans in those days, lotuses were mythological. They didn't exist. I asked my 4th grade teacher that once, because we were reading about Greek mythology. She said, no, there's no such thing as a lotus. It's mythological. It was so this is about mangoes. It was very expensive and usually had no taste. From his room, he would sometimes hear the horns of ocean liners, and he would dream that someday he would sail around the world with the Sankirtan party, preaching in all the major cities of the world. So this line is very important. We were walking with Prabhupada one day on a morning walk in New York City. It was when the temple, where was the temple? Yes, it was in Brooklyn then. We were walking in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. And Prabhupada, all of a sudden, while we were walking, he said, I had a dream. And in this dream, I was in a big boat, and I had 12 sannyasis and 12 brahmacharis. And we were traveling in this boat, and in every port, we would go and have Sankirtan. And we were traveling all over the world. So this is how, even at this time, Prabhupada was thinking like this. And then, because there were quite a few sannyasis and other devotees on the walk, Brahmananda said, because we'll read later, Brahmananda, he actually used to work on a boat. And he came here to India also on the boat. So he said, oh, Prabhupada, I have experience working on a boat. Can I go? And the Bali Mardan said, yeah, I also have experience. Can I go? And all of a sudden they were making plans for having this big boat trip with Srila Prabhupada. So even then in dream form, in seed form. So in order to fulfill that desire that Prabhupada had, one boat, Narahari. And there was a magazine, he had the boat. It was a sail ship boat. It was in Hawaii. And he would take, because in Hawaii there are different islands, he would take that boat around. I think he also took it to Florida, something like that. But eventually that dream came true through the endeavors of his disciple. The weather went below freezing. So in New York City, they have these huge skyscrapers. And at the top of the skyscrapers, they have the time and the date and the temperature. So when we had our temple in Manhattan, when I would go to get my visas, I would look out the window before Mangalarti. It would be minus 17 degrees. And every morning it would be so freezing cold. But one New Yorker was here, and he said that it doesn't snow anymore because of climate change. The whole climate has changed now, but when Prabhupada was there, it was freezing cold. The weather went below freezing, colder than he had ever experienced in India. Delhi, he had to walk towards the Hudson, again, the Hudson River. And you know, by a river, there's always a gust of wind, cool, freezing wind. Against a west wind that even on an ordinary winter's day would take your breath away and make your eyes water and your face grow numb. The air would be so cold that you couldn't take in the air, breathing. It would, and your nose would burn because the air was so freezing. On a stormy day, the driving wind and sudden gusts could even knock a man down. Sometimes a cold rain would turn the streets slick with ice. The cold would become especially severe as one approached the shelterless, windswept area of West Side Drive. So we saw that map. That's right next to the river where it's the coldest. The buildings aren't there to stop the wind from coming in. Where occasional whirlwinds carried brown leaves and paper trash mysteriously high into the air. Srila Prabhupada wore a coat Dr. Mishra had given him, but he never gave up wearing his dhoti, despite the cold, windy walks. So it would be so cold that we would buy for the devotees, because we had to buy, everyone, we had uniforms actually. The brahmacharis, of course, wore saffron, and the grihastas, they wore yellow. So it was so freezing cold to do Sankirtan. We used to buy reams of wool and make woolen dhotis and woolen kurtas for the devotees so that they wouldn't freeze to death on Sankirtan. Swami Nikhilananda of the Ramakrishna Mission had advised Prabhupada that if he wanted to stay in the West, he should abandon his traditional Indian dress and strict vegetarianism. Meat eating and liquor, as well as pants and coat, were almost a necessity in this climate, he had said. Before Prabhupada had left India, one of his godbrothers had demonstrated to him how he should eat in the West with a knife and fork. But Prabhupada never considered taking on Western ways. His advisors cautioned him not to remain an alien, but to get into the spirit of American life, even if it meant breaking vows he had held in India. Almost all Indian immigrants compromised their old ways. Did you find that to be true, Narendra Krishna, amongst your... Yes?
Vegetable soup, and I found a piece of hot dog in it.
Vegetable soup, and he found a piece of meat?
Yeah.
Terrible.
I took it out, take it out.
Oh, Krishna.
Nothing was there.
But Prabhupada's idea was different, and he could not be budged. The others may have had to compromise, he thought, but they had come to beg technological knowledge from the West. I have not come to beg something, he said, but to give something. In his solitary wanderings, Srila Prabhupada made acquaintances with a number of local people. There was Mr. Rubin, a Turkish Jew, who worked as a New York subway conductor. Mr. Rubin met Prabhupada on a park bench, and being a sociable fellow and a world traveler, sat and talked with the Indian holy man. So this is what Mr. Rubin has to say about meeting Prabhupada. He seemed to know that he would have temples filled up with the devotees. He would look out and say, I am not a poor man. I am rich. There are temples and books. They are existing. They are there. But the time is separating us from them. He always mentioned we and spoke about the one who sent him, his spiritual master. He didn't know people at that time, but he said, I am never alone. He always looked like a lonely man to me. That's what made me think of him like a holy man, Elijah, who always went out alone. I don't believe he had any followers. So this being a Turkish Jew speaking, Elijah is the prophet amongst the Jews who's supposed to come alone and liberate all of the people and take them back to God. He's the prophet. And the Jews that broke off from Judaism, the Christians, they say that Jesus Christ was that prophet, that Elijah. And the conservative Jews those who remain in Judaism, they say, no, Elijah has not come yet. So this was a very great compliment by Mr. Rubin, comparing Srila Prabhupada to the prophet who came to save the world. That's why amongst the followers of Abraham, that's the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, they were all coming from the same root forefather, Abraham. They bury their dead because they say that when the prophet Elijah comes, everyone will raise up from the dead and be in the kingdom of God. So they keep because they believe that they're their bodies, they keep the bodies buried like that. And of course, we understand differently that the body is simply a machine, that's all, and we transmigrate from body to body. When the weather was not rainy or icy, Prabhupada would catch the bus to Grand Central Station. So this is, what a beautiful temple this would be. This is Grand Central Station in New York City. And we saw last week, during the blackout, how all these people were roaming around. They were stuck in this dark, huge building all night long, so they just lie down on the floor and slept until the lights came on at 7 in the morning. So Prabhupada would come here, he'd take the bus, Grand Central, I mean, this is, the center of the transportation within New York. And then from there, and visit the Central Library on 42nd Street. Now, this is a very famous place for the devotees. We used to do Sankirtan here almost every day. His Srimad Bhagavatams were there in the library. Some of the same volumes he had sold to the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi. And he took pleasure in seeing them listed in the card catalog and learning that they were being regularly checked out and read. He would sometimes walk through UN Plaza or walk up to the New India House on 64th Street, where he had met Mr. Malhotra, a consulate officer. It was through Mr. Malhotra that he had contacted the Tagore Society and had secured an invitation to lecture before one of their meetings back in November. Riding the bus down Fifth Avenue, he would look out at the buildings and imagine that someday they could be used in Krishna consciousness. He would take a special interest in certain buildings, one on 23rd Street and one with a dome on 14th Street attracted his attention. He would think of how the materialists had constructed such elaborate buildings and had yet made no provisions for spiritual life. Despite all the great achievements of technology, the people felt empty and useless. They had built these great buildings, but the children were going to LSD. So here we have the library. Now the library is on, remember, in Manhattan, 1st Street, 2nd Street, all the way up. So this is 5th Avenue, which is the most important avenue coming down. And then it's at 42nd Street. And you go a little further past 42nd Street and you get to the most degraded area, that's Times Square, where everyone goes for entertainment. But here at 5th and 42nd is this wonderful library. So the devotees used to go there. This is inside the library, how magnificent it is. So Prabhupada's books were already here before he got to America. The books came before him. We used to go in and see Prabhupada's books there. And here we have, this is where we used to do Sankirtan. The devotees would walk on 42nd Street. They go from 5th Avenue all the way down to Times Square because everyone would be at the movies and the clubs and the play, where they have the dramas and plays. So they'd walk down there, and there's a beautiful park behind the library. They would all do Sankirtan in there, and they would do Sankirtan on the side, on 42nd Street, and in front, all around this area, because it was a nice, clean, and more or less sattvic because of the library. Now, when Prabhupada, because remember, Prabhupada is all alone, as Mr. Rubin said, and that was 1965. In 1976, the devotees arranged for a 3-cart Ratha Yatra right down Fifth Avenue. So I'll just show you. This is where the Indian Embassy is, right? And this is the beginning of Central Park. This is where the Ratha Yatra starts. And it comes all the way down Fifth Avenue. This is where the library is. Then it continues down Fifth Avenue to 8th Street. And that's where Washington Square is. Prabhupada and the devotees, they would sometimes go to Tompkins Square, and sometimes they would go to Washington Square. So this whole, it was like from 59th to 8th, 51 blocks they walked down Fifth Avenue on Ratha Yatra. So this is Prabhupada now, 11 years later. Here he is walking up onto Subhadra's cart, sitting on the cart with the devotees. Success in 11 years in America. All his dreams coming true. This is Sankirtan in the early days. See, there's Brahmananda, Bhardraj, Rishi Kumar, all the New York devotees doing Sankirtan. This is when Brahmananda had just taken sannyas. They made a whole tour of all the temples around America. This is Panchagoda. This is where he goes when he leaves Vrindavan. He goes on Sankirtan and does other preaching. And I think the last one, that's me at the library. Someone just sent me that. I was 19 there because I would hang out at the library and distribute books there. Okay. All right. Hare Krishna. Jai.